Ms. Drennan, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Graham? Commissioner Graham? Commissioner Hutton?
He's here and I am too.
Oh, fantastic. Commissioner Skinner? Here. Chair Needham?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Slavic? Here. Commissioner Appel? Absent. Commissioner Gibb Randall? Here. Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Commissioner Kellewert? Commissioner Brown?
Here.
And Commissioner Mursky?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Terrific. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any additions or changes to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve?
Mine.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Next, we have the minutes from our February meeting. Any changes to those? Is there a motion to approve?
Yep. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. And next, we have public commentary. Is anyone from the public here who would like to make a statement to the commission? Nobody? All right, you will have another opportunity toward the end of the meeting if you so choose. We don't have any unfinished business tonight, and our first item of new business is a presentation on stormwater from the city's Jen Lawson.
Good evening, all. Hello. Thank you for the hello. I was asked to come speak with you all about stormwater in the city of Ann Arbor. And after a little bit of soul searching, it's a big, big ask. So I decided to focus a little bit on telling the story of how we manage stormwater, some of the tools that we use, and some of the projects that we've done over the past 10 years for both quality and quantity management, and then open it up to some questions. And pardon my technological prowess here, we're having some issues. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background. What is stormwater in Ann Arbor? Where is it? How do you see it? How do we kind of manage it? I'm going to take a few slides to talk about the stormwater utility that we have here in Ann Arbor, which is a very unique item that I want to make sure I touch on. That's how we finance most of our projects. I'm going to hone in on a few of the creek shed projects, some of the citywide programs that aren't necessarily specific to any geographic area, how we use data and science to manage stormwater, and then I can open it up for questions. So this is the city of Ann Arbor. North is up. This is how most people see the city. But this is how I see the city. All of the water. This is all of the open water in the city of Ann Arbor. The Huron River goes right through the center from northwest to southeast. I knew I was going to have technology things. And this is breaking it down even further into creek sheds. So we have several creeks in the city of Ann Arbor that all flow into the Huron River. We have Allen Creek, Mallett's Creek, Swift Run Creek. We have drainage that goes directly into the Huron that doesn't touch any additional creeks. A little bit of Honey Creek is in the city. Traver Creek to the north, Miller's Creek, and a little bit of Fleming Creek on the far east. So of all of that drainage in the city, we don't actually own and operate all of it. There's a big swath through the middle in blue. University of Michigan owns and operates that portion of the stormwater system. Everything in the bright green is owned and operated by the city. The red lines are owned and operated by the county. Of important note though, the city pays for the maintenance of county drains. They just send us a bill once a year. The purple lines are privately owned. And then there's a few yellow lines in there that are what are considered waters of the state under jurisdiction directly of the state of Michigan. So just thinking about the stormwater pipes in the city of Ann Arbor, we have 231 miles of pipe. If you got in your kayak in Ann Arbor, you could almost get to Chicago. You'd have to stop and take the L. thinking not just though of the pipes, but if we add all of the open creeks and ditches, it's 540 miles of conveyance of stormwater. That gets you from Ann Arbor to just about St. Louis. Ultimately, we have a lot of stormwater system that we have to operate and maintain. Public Works has 6 staff. There are 6 wonderful gentlemen that drive around the city and fix the drainage, do improvements for us, and maintain our system. So thinking back to the pipes, again, the 231 miles of pipe, almost 20% of our system was installed prior to 1940. We do have some that are 1900s decade-ish. A large portion of the city was developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Over half of our stormwater pipe was installed then. And the last quarter was installed in the city basically since the 1980s. One thing to keep note though, just because a pipe is old doesn't mean that it's bad. Pipes were built much stronger and thicker pre-war. And so you do have a lot of older pipe in the system that still has a lot of life left in it. So I want to talk a little bit about managing the stormwater system, what we do to manage it. So when I say stormwater management, I think a lot of you probably have a preconceived notion. I know I did when I started doing stormwater management 20 years ago. But it really encompasses a lot of different things here at the city. We have an asset management program that covers operations, maintenance, work orders, work scheduling, as well as inventorying and figuring out how we maintain our system. It covers capital improvement projects. It covers a lot of our regulatory programming, as well as enforcement of those regulations, both state regulations, federal regulations, as well as local regulations. It includes floodplain programming and implementation of floodplain projects here in the city. Somewhat unique to the city of Ann Arbor, our stormwater management system also includes the street trees. So our urban street trees, forestry is out of our stormwater program. And we also have a wonderful green streets policy that many of you may remember because it actually came out of the Environmental Commission. And that looks at city-owned projects, including road projects, making sure that the city walks the walk just like we hold our developers. And we have to make sure that any road project that is done, a reconstruction of a road, also addresses stormwater for infiltration and water quality improvements. So I mentioned a stormwater utility. There are 9 stormwater utilities in the state of Michigan, and this is a funding source that essentially creates the revenue for this management of our stormwater system based on a fee assessed to every parcel in town, including the university, including churches. Everybody pays because everybody creates runoff. So we look at the square footage of every single parcel of impervious area, so that's area that doesn't infiltrate water, and everyone gets a quarterly bill. So one of my favorite examples, this is a neighborhood in Ann Arbor that does illustrate that everybody pays. But not everybody pays the same because not everyone's house is the same size and not everybody has the same size driveway or the same size garage. And so you can see there's 3 houses here right at the corner that are different colors. Each of these different colors represent a different tier for our stormwater utility. And so those 3 neighbors, the house on the far left, that's 2355, gets the largest bill. I would think they're probably in tier 3. 2511 is tier 2 and 2517 is tier 1. And then my favorite picture, anyone know where this is? Yeah, they pay too. You can see how much impervious area there is. This is the DIAG at the University of Michigan. They are our largest ratepayer for stormwater. But we do work hand in hand with them, making sure that projects that they do implement are reducing impervious area. They have some of the same regulations that we do. Yes?
Sometimes people marvel that a gravel driveway is considered similar to a concrete driveway for this calculation.
It is. So gravel driveways are a perfect example. It's gravel, so you'd think that water would percolate through it. We actually have a wonderful tool that we will come out and test your driveway. That gravel gets so compacted with cars driving over it for the past however many years. We'll come out and test to see if it is actually pervious. I think 9 times out of 10 we found that it's still impervious. But if anyone has a question about a gravel driveway, we're more than willing to come out and check. So thinking about all 3 of our water utilities here at the city, stormwater still is kind of the little brother. We have roughly $9.1 million of revenue. It's about 16% of the revenue coming into our system, as compared to water and sewer, bigger systems, different types of operations and maintenance. What does the stormwater system look like? It looks like pipes. It looks like outfalls. This is an outfall of stormwater dumping into the Huron River. Some of the things that we do internally are inspection of the system. So how many of you remember how many miles of pipe there are? 231. Thank you, Shannon. We inspect those miles of pipe. Not all 231 in 1 year. We don't have enough staff to do that. But what we do have is a wonderful technology. It's a robot camera that our staff drive up the system and televise and rate the condition of the pipes. Things that we see in the pipes. A fairly decent pipe, nothing special. Tree roots, blockages, broken pipes, critters, more critters. One thing to note, the city's stormwater system is entirely separate from our wastewater system. We have what's called a municipal separate storm sewer system. City of Detroit has a combined system. A lot of your first ring communities in the Detroit area have a combined system. That means that both rainwater and sewage are in the same pipe. Ours are separate, and that's very fortunate for us. But it also does mean that those 231 miles of pipe, most of them go directly to the river without treatment, because we don't treat our stormwater. So one of the things that we're doing internally now is looking for opportunities to treat that stormwater before it gets to the river, both improving the quality of the stormwater as well as reducing the quantity. And that quantity reduction is really important, because if you think about all of the rain that falls in the city, if we just push all of that water out to the river, it's going to cause floods, it's going to cause erosion, as opposed to pre-settlement, Mother Nature had all of that rainwater soaking into the ground. So we look at how we can mimic nature for both the quantity management as well as the quality management. So we use what's been termed green infrastructure. And green really means that it doesn't have to be the color green, but it is something that was Mother Nature intended, or mimicking nature. So if we do some back of the envelope calculations, here in the city we are, and I'm not saying this being self-boastful, but we are the leader in the state for green infrastructure. We have more green infrastructure than any other community in the entire state. We have 124 city-owned rain gardens, bioswales, large detention facilities, and we have 277 residential rain gardens, which in itself, those numbers are amazing. But the better numbers are what we actually do with the pieces of green infrastructure. So annually, that's per year, we infiltrate or treat 403 million gallons of stormwater just in the city-owned. That's a great number. That number will increase as we continue to increase through our Green Streets policy, through an implementation of green infrastructure. This isn't even including stuff on private property, though. This isn't including what we require developers to do. There is another number on there that I want to say a personal thank you to all of our residents who have rain gardens that they have let us know about, and they're infiltrating and treating 3 million gallons of stormwater, which is nothing to sniff your nose at. That's still quite a wonderful number to see. question? Yes?
Are any of those, this kind of slide data on a dashboard online?
Not online, but we do have this information on an internal dashboard. We can certainly share it when we look at external dashboarding. Sure. So I do want to take a minute to talk, kind of honing in on a few creek shed projects. A couple months ago, I think there was a handout that you received regarding Allen Creek. It was just kind of a little bit of a teaser to say, hey, we do some really cool things. In fact, we've spent over $10 million in Allen Creek in the past 10 years. So after I presented that to you guys a couple months ago, I did some more homework and I crunched a whole lot more numbers. And I have to admit, part of me has an engineering brain, so I'm always looking for that data and numbers to justify some of the science behind everything. So by the numbers, and I know this is a really number-heavy table, but what this is telling you is that we have a lot of creek sheds in the city that we're doing a lot in. So at the bottom, you see we've spent $31.6 million just in stormwater improvements. That's both capital as well as reports and studies over the past 10 years. What's not included in this number is the operations and maintenance. That's an even different number, and I could give an hour talk about what we've done there. But I'm focusing mostly tonight on in the ground, boots on the ground, improvements to water quality and water quantity management. Something to note though, so I'll kind of read through this table. In Allen Creek, for example, we've actually spent $11.5 million over the past 10 years. And that's 36% of what we spent. But Allen Creek actually only covers 17% of the city. So we're spending a lot of money in Allen Creek. Allen Creek is 49% impervious, so almost half impervious. And that watershed health indicator index score is on a scale from 1 to 100, with 100 being the best. Allen Creek, as you all know, is entirely underground. It scored a 5. And anecdotally, I was told it scored a 5 because it's underground and it's cold. Citywide, that's where you see our urban forestry program. So we've been planting 1,000 trees a year for the past 10 years. We've been doing model calibration, rate studies, so a lot of our larger studies. That's where that 7.7 million number comes from. Traver Creek, that 3% is mostly attributed to the Traver Creek Golf Course project that was completed. Direct drainage is everything, again, immediately adjacent to the Huron River. That would be projects within the Arb area, projects that are kind of old north side area. There is a 0% on here that I do want to explain in Swift Run. We've spent about $125,000. We had one project that we did in Swift Run last year. And it does say 0% because of decimals. So I just want to make sure that my math's correct. Just wanted to point that out. But looking at each individual area, so citywide projects, we've done some sewer lining, we've done tree planting, tree inventories, our hydraulic model and calibration, street resurfacing. A lot of our capital road projects do take budget from stormwater because as they're fixing a road, there are stormwater inlets and stormwater pipe connections that also need to be included. And so many of our road projects do pull capital from stormwater. In Millers Creek, we've done 3 projects. Some of these projects may look familiar to some of you. In Mallets, we've done a lot of really good stuff. A lot of above ground projects, a lot of stream bank stabilization projects. Some rain garden projects in there. Mallets also is fortunate to have some of our porous road surface projects. Traver, we have some not so exciting projects, storm sewer crossings underneath the railroad, a road project on Pontiac Trail, culvert replacement on Duvarn, and the Leslie Park Golf Course project that I mentioned. We haven't done any projects in Fleming. Fleming's only 4%, and it's actually really on the far east side of Ann Arbor. But we haven't done any stormwater-based projects in Fleming Creek. Swift Run, I mentioned we had one project. And those are rain gardens, the residential rain gardens in the public right-of-way that we worked with some residents on. Directly to the Huron River, we have a lot of road projects, a lot of really not exciting projects. But again, it's a lot of that quantity management that we've had to work on. In Honey Creek, we just finished the Sister Lake Stormwater Retrofit project where we captured all of the stormwater from one neighborhood before it got into First Sister Lake and infiltrated it, treated it, and we're actually still kind of under warranty for those plantings for this year. And in Allen, I apologize, the list got really small. I had to fit everything on the screen, but we've done a lot of wonderful projects. You will also see projects regarding the Allen Creek berm is on here, some demolitions that we've done in floodplain. So we have a lot of wonderful things in Allen Creek we've done. Just for reference, I'm not sure how many of you have seen this picture. This is what Allen Creek used to look like. This picture was taken in 1918, I think is what was written on the back. And this is actually over off of Washington in the old West Side neighborhood. I'm not sure if they're deciding what they're gonna do or if they're just hanging out, but that is what Allen Creek used to look like. This is what Allen Creek does now, because we've decided to put it all in a pipe. We've put it all in a pipe and continued to build, continued to create impervious area, and there's so much water that comes. We're getting manholes that pop off. What we have done recently, instead of this, because as wonderful as our residents are, we've had a few good Samaritans that have seen manhole lids that have popped off like this and tried to put them back on. And from a liability standpoint, I don't want anyone's toes missing. So we have now graded, bolted down manhole lids. But this was a common occurrence that we would see in large events, probably about 8 or 9 years ago. So a few of the citywide projects and programs that I want to delve into. This picture is actually a great picture. What's underneath 4th Ave right now between Huron and Liberty. This was a project done about 6 or 7 years ago. The storm drains on this road go into a large stone vault. That's all that stone you see there. That infiltrates the 100-year event, which is unheard of for projects.
Soil all the way down.
What's that?
Sand all the way down.
It is a wonderful, yeah, downtown was built on sand, which is great, sort of, because the more we infiltrate, the more concern we have. But yeah, downtown has a great, great sand ribbon right through it. So I mentioned we have a lot of those projects and programs that we do, floodplain programming, regulatory permitting, asset management. This picture is from 2013, I believe, 2012, 2013, over in the campus area.
That's Hill Street,
Hill?
Hill and Church, Hill and Forest.
Some of the individual projects that we've done across the city, that calibrated hydraulic model, I'm going to talk about in a few slides. But that is one of the most important tools we have to manage our stormwater system. Our engineers adore this program. As a matter of fact, it's a great decision maker and scenario builder for us as we look at improving our stormwater system. We also have projects proposed for detention pond upgrades. Detention ponds that were built 30 some odd years ago were built for a different kind of storm and a different kind of development. And they really weren't built for water quality improvements. They were just built to hold all the storm water and let it go later. We've actually started inventorying and assessing our city-owned detention ponds and looking at opportunities that we can improve them now. So not just for quantity management, but for quantity management as well. We also have a wonderful and I will say unique relationship with the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner's Office. We pay for a staff person, essentially, to assist us with financing projects, assist us with project implementation. So sometimes you see the county at the city offices, and in fact, sometimes it's gray. We're not really sure who works for who sometimes. But we do work hand in hand with the Water Resource Commissioner's Office to implement large-scale projects. We also work with them, I'm going to put on my maintenance hat really quick. We actually contract with the county to do maintenance on all of the green infrastructure that we have in the city because we don't have the staff and we don't have the staff expertise to implement all of that maintenance. And it's about $200,000 a year that we're spending on maintenance of that green infrastructure. Okay. So I mentioned a little bit that we use data and science. We measure everything that we do, and we don't make decisions without running the models, without having the science and data to back up those decisions. We have available also online for the public stream gauges that we actually pay the USGS for. We have several stream gauges around town. We also have rain gauges. There are 5 rain gauges in the city that are tipping buckets every 15 minutes, and so we know exactly how much rain falls. We have flow meters for specific projects that we put in the systems. We have radar rainfall. I can show you one of those maps. And we also have an extremely complete GIS program or system, and that GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. It's a geospatial tool to connect spatial data with non-spatial data. Yes, ma'am?
Does that same equipment measure water quality?
No, it does not. We have one stream gauge that we work with the USGS at Wall Street that does some of the water quality monitoring, but we found that it's more efficient for us to do our own water quality monitoring because there's so many different parameters. And then we also contract with the Huron River Watershed Council, and they do a lot of the stream modeling or stream monitoring for us. So this is our stormwater management model. Again, it's a lot of engineer speak, but in a simple form, it is a network of our pipes and channels and structures that we can run simulations through with different storm events, different durations, different frequency, different volumes of water, and we can see how our system would react, where we may have surcharges, if we put a blockage in the system, what might happen. If we have future development, what might happen and what some of those needs are. A little bit plug, we also have models for our drinking water system and our sanitary system. So this is what the printout of a stormwater model would look like. You can kind of see the stadium in the bottom center. I remember what rain event this was. I think we did this as a larger 10-year event. The red pipes would be running full. The black pipes would be to the top of the structure, but none of these would be coming out of the structure in this scenario. This is a screenshot of what the stream gauge data looks like at the USGS website. If you go on the city's website, we actually have links to all of this, but we can see exactly the flow and depth of several point locations, both in the Huron River as well as some of our creek sheds. We don't have the water quality, but we do have how much water is passing at that moment, and we can start seeing how the creeks are reacting to different rain events. This information is, I'll call it relatively real time. Usually it's about an hour lag. And then this is a screenshot of what our rain gauges look like. The blue dots are the 5 locations. Out at First Sister Lake we have one, at Barton Dam we have one, up on North Campus, down at 2000 South Industrial, and then here on the top of City Hall. You can look at these as either daily points or 15-minute points of rainfall for each of those locations. And this usually is updated, takes a couple hours. It's not instant. This is an example of some of our project-specific flow monitoring. This is hydrographs looking at how we actually did a project in Mallett's Creek, what happened during specific rain events and where our peak flows were. This is an example of the rainfall data. I love this slide because it tells a really wonderful graphic story. In June of 2010, there was a really, really big rain event, and we had a lot of people complaining about the amount of rain that they received. But then as you can kind of look, red is the most rain. Red, I think, is 3.17 inches at the most. And yellow is not a lot of rain. And what this tells us is that when you listen to Channel 7 and they say, oh, you got 3 inches of rain, not everybody receives that same amount of rain because rainfall's different. We're in a valley here in Ann Arbor, and depending on the weather pattern, sometimes those storms move and they split. So we do look for some of our larger rain events to pull this data to actually look at how the rain fell in the city. And I talked about data, I talked about projects, I talked about how much we spent on things, and I'd like to open it up with one quick question for you guys, and then you can ask me questions. This is a storm drain here in the city of Ann Arbor. How many storm drains do you think we have in the city of Ann Arbor? 231 miles of pipe. Come on, guesses. It's more than, how many?
1,000?
Way more. 10,000. Way more. We have over 15,000 inlets in the city. If we count inlets and structures, so solid manholes, we have 23,000 just in the stormwater system. We have a lot of appurtenances in our system. So with that, thank you.
Questions? No?
So I have several questions related to, I'll say, the cost structure, to make sure I understood. First of all, at, I guess, 30,000 foot level, does the utility and its revenue cover our costs adequately? In other words, are we in a situation where we're looking at our stormwater activities broadly, and we're falling behind X dollars per year, and we have some mounting amount of work that's gathering where we're going to say 5 years from now, 20 years from now, oh, we've got this $50 million bill coming?
Yes, but only because a couple years ago, we did a rate study. And we worked with a financial model to plug in our capital improvements plan, our operations and maintenance for the next 20 years. And so all of our rate increases over the next several years are based on those future needs. And at this time, we are on track for current spending.
Good.
It's a good question. Thank you.
I have a couple, if I may. I want to also make sure I understood. The budget is roughly $9 million a year. And if I take the $31 million in improvements and divide that by 10, roughly, because it was over 10 years, that means that we're spending roughly $3 million a year in improvements out of the $9 million.
The math isn't that easy because I don't have the operations and maintenance numbers in here.
Oh, you
and
do
I
not.
don't have the administration numbers in here. If you are interested in those numbers for the stormwater revenue as a whole,
So what's the $9 million then for?
the $9 million is revenue.
Revenue, okay.
The $9 million is the revenue that is created by the
Right.
utility
Right.
For us to do operations and maintenance,
Right.
capital improvements,
Yep.
and administration of the program.
So, but that's covering the roughly $3 million a year in the kind of projects that you showed in each one of the creek sheds?
Moving forward, yes. Previous to this, we only had 6 million, or 5 million, or 4 million. So it hasn't been a static number.
Okay.
And it won't be a static number as we progressively improve components of our system.
Okay. Then, I guess my major question is, goes to some discussions that you're probably aware of related to the city budget and the county millage rebate. So there are, as you know, a resolution sponsored by the mayor, co-sponsored by Councilmember Griswold, that would basically take the money that comes from the rebate and without tying it to the rebate in the millage, would allocate a certain amount of money to climate action, to affordable housing, and to pedestrian safety. There's likely going to be another resolution that's going to say, residents fed back that we have certain issues and priorities, and we think we should spend 15% here, 10% there, 8% there. The percentage that came from that survey would, if it's allocated that way, would increase the spending on water and sewer infrastructure by $250,000. So that's roughly 2.7% of the total amount that's just the 9 million. I don't know what the water portion is of that. I don't know if that's one of the other figures that you showed on your circular chart. What I'm wondering is, does $250,000 change anything in terms of how the sewer system is run and how how improvements are financed? Because that's going to take a significant amount of money away from affordable housing and from climate action. It will more than double climate action funding. It will have a big impact in terms of leverage on the affordable housing side. And so what I'm wondering is, if we take that money, if that allocation, and shift it to a different allocation where it's spread out over 6 or 7 different issue areas, what does $250,000 do for the sewer system?
Something to keep in mind.
I know that I'm putting you on a spot.
You are putting me on the spot. Something to keep in mind, stormwater revenue can only be spent on stormwater. So when we think about where we need to be with our rate structure for stormwater, we've been very, very diligent to make sure that we're covering our costs. And one thing that I didn't really express, I kind of sort of tried to, is that the way we manage our system does include climate adaptation and climate change. The way that we are designing our stormwater system, the way that we are requiring developers to mitigate stormwater, it does address climate adaptation strategies. If someone came to me and said, I have $250,000 for you to find and spend on stormwater, I'm sure I could find somewhere. We have a lot of projects in our capital improvement plan that do get pushed. We have a lot of programs that I would love to see implemented that, again, we only, in the stormwater program, we have roughly 19 full-time equivalent staff people. I mentioned the 6 wonderful gentlemen in public works that are kind of the boots on the ground fixing things, but those 19 full-time equivalents, a lot of it is programmatic, engineering, staffing, regulatory enforcement. There are always programs that we would love to be able to implement, some of them on the public education side, some of them on the outreach side, really to build awareness in our community about stormwater management. I'm not really answering your question, but what I'm saying is there are certainly there could be opportunities for that 250. Would it assist us in a new capital project? Probably not. Would it assist us in some sort of program? Probably. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I have one last question, if I may,
Yes.
and that is, what would you say are key takeaways for residents? What should residents be doing? Or based on everything you presented and what can we do to help improve stormwater quality, stormwater runoff, et cetera? I mean, we just heard taking an asphalt or concrete driveway and making it a gravel driveway is really not a significant strategy. So what are the kinds of things that we should be doing in our everyday lives and the people that we interface with, and encouraging them to do to improve stormwater issues in general?
That is a really big question to answer. One of the things that I have dealt with my entire career focused around stormwater is stormwater awareness. If I went into a school tomorrow morning and asked the third graders if they knew, first of all, where the Huron River was. I think in Ann Arbor they might know, but where the catch basin at the end of their road actually went to, I don't know how many of them would actually know that. We just recently, about 12 or 13 years ago, got the word watershed into the state's benchmarks and standards for education. And that's at a 4th grade level is when they learn about watershed. But stormwater's not there. So when I think about what the ultimate thing is, it's really awareness. It's the fact that your actions on your property, business property, home property, the roads, all do impact stormwater from a quality standpoint, from a quantity standpoint. That, and my wonderful example that I always use, that cold cup of coffee that you dumped out, if you don't dump it on the grass, it's going to end up in the storm drain, it's going to end up in the river. Everything that ends up on our roads, the cigarette butts that are flicked out of the windows, the leaves that people blow into the road because they don't want it on their lawn.
Our pets.
Our pets, that was my next one, pets that we don't pick up after. All of these have, you'd think minor, but they start adding up. There are so many ways that everybody affects stormwater quality and stormwater quantity. But my favorite example is my in-laws. If I ask them about that, first of all, they're not really sure what river is even close, what watershed they live in. It's not the world that they grew up in, and it's not something that they worry about every day. I think about it daily, so of course I know, but I don't think a lot of people actually fully comprehend how their lives touch stormwater. And that's actually a good segue into some of the things that I put in front of you guys. So one of the other programs that I could talk for an hour about is some of our education and outreach for water awareness in the city. You have a sticker that is A2H2O. I'd love to see those stickers all over town. I put mine on my laptop. I actually did have a guy say, "What's that chemistry?" I had to explain him it wasn't. You have a chip clip that is one of the strongest magnets I've ever seen. Use it for chips, put it on your fridge, that'd be great. But again, a little bit of that awareness that stormwater is around. And the last two pieces kind of go hand in hand. The little button, if you look closely, is actually a teenage raindrop. We have a program with a local artist. We're actually morphing it into a different local artist, where we built a comic around the life of a teenage raindrop, teaching the water cycle, teaching stormwater management. We have 3 issues that we're working on. So this first issue, I think, is the My Life as a Teenage Raindrop. And you kind of go through the water cycle, and maybe he's going into the ground. The second issue we have, or the second article, is Teenage Raindrop visiting City Hall. So a couple of years ago, we did a lot of stormwater improvements here at City Hall. In fact, we are zero runoff here. We use, infiltrate, and uptake all of the stormwater that falls on City Hall. But we told the story of that through a teenage raindrop who was visiting. And the third one coming out, hopefully in the next couple months, is Teenage Raindrop's cousin who's going to visit the skate park. Because our skate park was built around a lot of really cool rain gardens and infiltration beds. And when she goes skateboarding, we want to be able to talk about how different places around town improve water quality and address stormwater management. So those are given out at most of the schools, elementary schools, some high schools, all of our public events, and we partnered with the county as well to do some of that outreach. So those are just little teasers of some of the fun educational outreach things that we have. We do partner with the Ann Arbor schools for an urban hydrology curriculum from 2nd through 6th grade. So a lot of the students in the Ann Arbor program do kind of learn about the water system here in the city of Ann Arbor. So thank you for that segue.
Other questions for Ms. Lawson?
I guess I'd first just like to say that as somebody who works in this and somebody who works in other places in the state, I just want to say how grateful I am to live in this place in terms of the stormwater work that is being done here, because it truly is a model for many other communities that come and visit the different facilities that we have, and we're lucky to have the kind of leadership that we do and the kind of programs that are taking place here. So that I feel very strongly about. I also want to respond a little bit to John's question and have a question for you, Jen, around this too. Because of sitting on Planning Commission as well, there were some developments in the kind of in the Glendale neighborhood where it became clear that some of those streets actually don't have stormwater infrastructure on them, and so a development was, going to be doing their own stormwater management, but it became very clear that the neighborhood was suffering in other ways that may or may not have been affected by the development, but as part of the public input process, many people showed up and said, our streets are flooding during rain events and things like that. So, so there are parts of the city that don't even have storm system at all, so, and which would eat up $250,000 like that. But I'm just wondering, so my first question is, are there plans for some of these areas in terms of the long-term capital improvements plan to be able to address some of these issues? It's hard. I mean, it's difficult soils, it's all kinds of things that are challenges there. And I'm just wondering how the city sees their $9 million budget in relation to some of these areas that just, kind of missed the boat, so to speak, in terms of when some of those things were being constructed in big, strong ways in the 50s. And
so it's a little bit of a slippery slope that you're asking. So just because a road is in the city of Ann Arbor that was not built with stormwater doesn't mean that we can just put stormwater in. Our stormwater utility is set up so that first-time improvements must be assessed to that property owner. I can't take money from the utility for first-time improvements. This actually happened over on Getty's. A couple of years ago, we were doing the big Getty's Road improvement, and we had a lot of areas on that road that never had stormwater. And we did have to assess for what we would have paid for the typical stormwater design. Now, we did a green infrastructure design over there with infiltration beds, and we also found wonderful sandy soil over there. But we didn't assess them for all of that. We just assessed them for what it would have cost us to put in a pipe. So in a lot of those areas that you're referencing, Shannon, it really would be on a case-by-case basis to determine if it's a first-time improvement or if it is an upgrade or an existing system improvement.
got it. Okay, that's an important distinction to understand.
Yes.
Another question I have, and this has to do with my own neighborhood, so you're going to have to bear with me on this one. I completely believe in the power of trees to be able, deciduous trees especially, to be able to intercept stormwater. There was some extremely severe tree pruning that came through our neighborhood and took off a whole bunch of lower branches, which seems to be, you don't just want to leave the stuff on top, you want there to be layers. And it was way above any kind of, garbage truck kind of clearance issue. And boy, it was just, it felt very harsh in light of just what the road looks like, but also, its impact on stormwater management too. It was not dead wood. It was. It seemed like it was kind of like, we're going up this high, and I'm just curious if you know sort of what the intent was behind that kind of
I do.
activity.
I feel like I have all the answers this evening. So a couple of years ago, well, it really started about 8 or 9 years ago, the city realized that we were way behind on tree maintenance. We did not have a regular pruning cycle because our forestry crews had been pulled off of regular tree pruning maintenance to address the emerald ash borer. All of the trees that died from that emerald ash borer was so widespread, our forestry crews didn't do any preventative maintenance because they were dealing with dead trees they had to remove. So when we completed our urban community forestry management plan a couple of years ago, one of the recommendations in that plan was to evaluate and implement a proactive street tree pruning program. which in theory sounds great, but we had to play catch up. And so over the past several years, what you've seen is catch up on tree pruning. Some of these trees that we had planted years and years ago had never been pruned. And so there were certain areas, and again, depending on the species, they did look really harsh because they had to really look at the overall health of those trees. I don't necessarily know which trees you're talking about. But when you have a tree that has never been pruned, coming in from an urban forestry standpoint, the trees aren't necessarily grown for their habitat and ecological like we're used to seeing. They're a street tree. They do have clearance issues they have to deal with. Even the species and types of trees that are planted, they do look at the underground utilities that are in that area. I do know that at the time that the program started with this catch-up of the routine street tree pruning, our forester was getting daily calls. Just because it was very shocking for so many people to see trees that had never been pruned, now we're getting pruned. If you are still concerned, I can certainly send our forester out. We have certified arborists looking at this. It's not just, someone going out and cutting trees willy-nilly.
Right.
But on a personal level, I want to come and see which trees you're talking about because I'm concerned.
My last question has to do with the stormwater utility and some of the lawsuits that have been happening around stormwater in especially the greater Detroit area, where some of the programs have basically been going through the ringer in terms of the court system, and that they're saying it's a tax instead of a fee and things like that. I'm just wondering how you feel about the program, the way that ours is set up, and how robust it is in terms of anybody trying to go at it in the courts.
I love that you use the word robust. I probably get a phone call once a week from a Detroit area, Michigan community, asking how in the world we have a successful utility. Some of the lawsuits that have occurred over the past several years have been based on communities that are implementing utilities unfairly. There was a decision made back in the 1990s called the Bolt versus Lansing decision. And at that time, that really set the precedent on how a stormwater utility functioned, how it was implemented. And the city of Lansing didn't implement a utility based on the amount of rainfall that fell. They made some pretty broad strokes and said, anybody under an acre, you're gonna pay $100 or whatever the number was back then, which, as we all know, isn't fair. That's not equitable. So the city of Ann Arbor does fly over the city every 3 years with color infrared photography to evaluate and assess the square footage of impervious area per parcel. And we update it every 3 years. So just with that alone, we're charging what that parcel creates. So that's one. The second aspect of Bolt is that it has to allow the parcel owner to control their use. You can make an analogy to a drinking water utility. If you don't use the water, you're not really going to get billed because there's a meter on there. So we have a credits program with the stormwater utility. If people put in rain gardens on their parcel, if they reduce the impervious surface, if they put rain barrels or bioswales or cisterns and reduce that amount of runoff, they can get credits on their bill. So we feel very strongly that our program as implemented is very, very, we call it Bolt-proof, based on that lawsuit from the 1990s. But we're always watching, we're always certainly paying attention. But because we use, again, that data and science, making sure that we are assessing exactly what the property owner produces, that's a really strong piece, which a lot of these other municipalities in Michigan don't do. They do that broad brushstroke. Another analogy, the city of Jackson, just about a year or two ago, they tried implementing a utility and it fell through because anything under 2 acres, they just did a broad brush stroke that they paid the same fee, which really is not fair. So, does that
So,
answer
yeah,
your
no, that's
question and
great.
make you feel a little
Yeah,
better?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. I know that our attorneys also are very much watching it, and we watch all the briefs that come out of Lansing regarding the stormwater utilities.
Anyone else? Did you?
I did have a couple questions on the, Councilmember Ramlawi has introduced a resolution to ban blowing of like cigarette butts from city streets into the storm drain and ban that kind of equipment because of the noise and the pollution that the two-stroke mowers. So we've been breaking it down, and it would take a whole bunch of batteries, you know, to do this. But from a environmental standpoint, do we have any information on how much cigarette butts and junk and dirt, street dirt is going into the downtown storm drains, that this would help by banning this and making people go back to brooms?
I don't immediately have it, but I do have the tonnage from our Vector truck. We vacuum out catch basins, and so I do have the tonnage that would be, that we would have brought back to our decant facility that I can pull.
That
So some
might be
historical
helpful.
data, maybe?
That might be helpful as we break it down and see all the different ways. Thank you.
And it wouldn't, I mean, we don't separate it by cigarette butts and that kind of thing. It's just tonnage of what we vacuum out, which could be any number of things that get washed into the catch basins. Yeah.
Can I comment on that? I encourage you to look at the resolution. We looked at it in a draft form, and I don't think it says anything about preventing things going into the storm sewer. It only addresses the way the unit is driven, and it outlaws two-stroke engines. It doesn't say that even if you use a broom, you can still broom it into the storm sewer, or if you use the battery-driven one, that you could put it in the storm sewer. So I don't think that the resolution really has any impact as it's drafted on stormwater and the quality of stormwater or anything else.
Thank you for adding that. I am just saying that as council members were talking about it and saying that, well, what was the real goal that they were trying to do here? And part of it was protect the storm drain. And so that it's evolving and amending
Okay.
is what's, and is it, so it's part of the creation of this, that's where it came in.
Okay.
I had two other quick questions. That other one, when you showed that one about the modeling of a flood, and it looked like maybe that was the 4th ward, it had the U of M Stadium in it and all that area. Is that, did you use that picture because that is the most flood risk?
No, I used it because the U of M Stadium is recognizable.
Okay. Well, that was sort of my question, is that are there certain wards or neighborhoods or creeks besides Allen Creek that are for its dirtiness? But
So
for-
in our calibration model report, we identified 13, I think, 16 areas that are, when we run the model, they're problem areas. And each of those problem areas have been addressed in our capital improvements plan, and we have recommended improvements in our CIP to address all of those areas.
Okay.
But
in
to your
proper time.
question of, is there a certain area? Allen Creek is very hard hit, but it's not where all of our flooding areas are. They are interspersed around town. And that model report is actually available online as well.
Great. And on the trees, a couple things on the trees. The subcommittee of the Environmental Council, the Natural Features Committee, we met and are interested in tree inventories and mapping, and I'm reading from the minutes here from Commissioner Graham about how we're interested in native forest fragments, tree canopy cover, turf grass areas, wetlands, waterways, flooding, drainage, all of that. Are you, how current is your inventory, and do you have any plans this year to enhance that?
Not this year, but next year we are actually updating our tree inventory. That's proposed as a new, it's not a capital project per se, but it is in our capital budget to update our tree inventory.
So to distinguish that batch of learning work from what you've done, your thing are street trees.
Yes.
That's addressing all the trees in the city,
No,
private as
Stormwater
well.
pays for the street trees.
street trees.
We do have an inventory of park trees, but I'm not going to call it a complete inventory.
The recreation area parts of parks, not the natural areas.
Yes.
Yep.
As for an inventory of park trees, I can't address that. I'm not sure.
The valuable stuff's already done by NAP. This is addressing the great swath of non-city-owned, non-public property across the city. The
We
rest
did
of the
we did an
urban-
iTree evaluation, which is a citywide assessment of our urban forest as a whole in 2011, I'm thinking.
Is that online?
It is online. One of the other projects that I didn't list is the update of our urban community forestry management plan. We just hired a brand-new forester, and that's one of the things on her plate for next year.
Very good. Good. So I have one.
Go on.
Sorry, Ann, I don't mean to interrupt. Go
No,
ahead.
go
and
ahead.
Finish.
Well, one of the ideas that had come out would be, would we have some sort of app, phone app, where it would signify when you're walking past a special heritage tree, or even just beep and identify, to your right is a 200-year-old tree on your phone as part of the interface with the tree inventory. Have you heard of any things like that?
Not here at the city, but in the update of our tree inventory and the management plan, I can certainly pass it along.
Well, then that's sort of under your education, outreach, and awareness. And my last question was just on that I know Dr. Missy Stoltz and Lisa Wandrash and people at the county, we have a whole bunch of different folks working on communications. Do you guys coordinate any of your communications with those other?
Yes, all of our communications go through our communications office. So we have a campaign that many of you may have seen on Twitter or on Facebook about the infrastructure system. There's actually supposed to be one printed, I don't see it. But that's run through our communications office. Our entire outreach strategy is run through our communications office. All of the Water Matters publications, Waste Watchers publications, there's always water, stormwater education in those, and that again is run through our communications office.
Thank you.
Yep.
So most inlets, those things on the curb, those guys,
These guys.
have a pipe that goes down. Very few of them have sumps at the bottom of that. There's an elbow that goes out to the main line. So you said catch basins that the Vector cleans a few minutes ago. That means somewhere in the lines there are pits, I presume, that where the line comes through and debris drops into them. Is that what you mean?
In most areas, yes.
How many of those are there?
Oh, I've never actually calculated, but I can get it back to you.
Thousands? Hundreds?
Thousands.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's very helpful to keep a lot of junk out of the river, isn't it?
It is. Our sumps in our inlet structures do keep a lot of your larger debris. It's not going to keep a lot of your fine sediments out, but it does provide an opportunity for a lot of those larger sediments to fall out or drop out into the sump.
Is there a design of those things that keeps them from being scoured on the high flow events?
No, not in the traditional design ones. No, and that's why we have a lot of this green infrastructure in place to capture it before it even gets into the system.
Very good. Ann Arbor's blessed. A lot of people made good decisions, not just about stormwater, but about drinking water and sanitary systems here that other cities didn't do as well.
I will
We're-
pass that along to staff. Thank you.
We're lucky.
Any other questions?
You guys have been quiet
Oh.
over here.
Commissioner Gabriel?
One other thing, and one of the things that we're also actively thinking about is MRF facility and the composting system and things like that. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is about not having curbside pickup for leaves and the leaf impact on our waterways in terms of stormwater and the chemistry that it then, how it affects our waterways in that way.
It's a special spot in my heart, Shannon. There is an enormous detriment to stormwater quality if you think about the amount of biological oxygen demand that comes from a rotting leaf. So all of those leaves that could be in bags or containers brought to a compost facility, instead they would be sitting in our curb lines and rotting and sucking oxygen out of the water that eventually is ending up in the Huron River. Not to mention the actual solids, so that leaf debris and litter, those float. They don't sink, and so that all is going to go out to the Huron River. I have memo upon memo that I've drafted annually on the detriment to stormwater quality and stormwater management if we went back to a leaf pickup system. If you're interested in that memo, we can certainly share it with the Environmental Commission. I think it would give a lot of good insight and information about what a leaf pickup would mean for water quality. And again, it's focused on water quality. There's a lot of other issues at hand, but where we're looking at stormwater quality and stormwater management, there are some big issues around that.
Yeah, that's, I think, really important for us to think about those intersections like that, because I'm sure a lot of you remember, every fall the city used to come through and clean out everything in the street. You were responsible for your own home and your yard, but not for the street. And I think what's really happened at this point is that people do their own yard, but all the stuff in the street, many people don't take care of. And so the net result is that it's all flowing down. So I just would like us to kind of think about that as we're thinking about the potential changes that we are considering for the composting that happens for the city and how that has an impact on stormwater and water quality.
Any other questions? Great. Thanks very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I'm going to try to turn these off so you can continue. Or not. Thank you.
So we're not going to do anything? Thank you, John. Okay. Do we have the? So the next item on the agenda is considering a draft work plan for the commission for the coming year. And as you recall, the way we've done that is our 3 work groups, natural features, water quality, or we're just calling it water, aren't we?
Yeah, water
Yes.
working group.
Water working group and solid waste working group. Really thank you to the chairs of the groups in particular, as well as everyone who participated in coming up with these ideas so quickly. I think this is really great. And we do have before us then the combined proposed goals for each group, which are brought together into a proposed work plan for the commission for the year. Just wanted to say a couple things about this, and I'll ask each work group chairperson to just briefly go through this. But the idea here, we're required to submit a work plan to the city council by the bylaws we recently adopted. So that's what's spurring this. But the way I look at it is it is a plan. It's not an ordinance. It's not an ironclad commitment. These are the things that we intend to do. And if we don't get to some, it's not ideal, but we're not necessarily committing to this. This is what we hope to accomplish. And by the same token, this is not meant to be comprehensive. We can add things. I'm sure we will add things as the year goes on. We can add things that don't naturally fall to one of our working groups. Any commissioner is, of course, still very welcome and encouraged to bring individual topics forward, but this hopefully will give us some direction for things that we want to tackle. So with that as an introduction, I will just ask each work group chairperson to briefly go through the work that their group has done so far. So I guess we'll just go in order. Commissioner Brown, if you
Okay, yeah. I was chairing the Solid Waste Working Group, and so we met 3 times, once a week, before this meeting. And we agreed on 2 SMART goals and then 3 other goals, which aren't so related to our mission, but that we think we can play a positive role in working with the city staff and with the council to try to make these happen. The first SMART goal was to define comprehensive, reliable metrics and data collection processes for solid waste operations citywide by June 1st in partnership with city staff. The city has a sustainability framework that's been posted for many years, and however, it's come to the attention of the Commission and others that there has not been a very systematic effort to capture the metrics that we would need to rightfully measure quantities such as diversion rates consistently over the years so that we could track progress in the areas as we might want to go to a zero waste, solid waste future. The second goal was to draft a zero waste vision for the city, incorporating elements of the Aptum solid waste resource management planning that's in progress right now, and the Washtenaw Regional Materials something agency, the WRMMA. This is a proposal that's put forth by Washtenaw County, where solid waste contracts, perhaps, or solid waste management across the county might be coordinated through an association of, or an authority of local governments. The city has posted a zero waste declaration in 2016, but it doesn't really have any meat or action to it. So, and the current planning process managed by the consultant group Aptum, the SWRMP process has pretty much made it clear that it's that a zero waste vision is outside the scope of their current contract. So, so we feel that working on these 2 issues would provide a benefit to the community over the year. So there are other opportunities that are also equally important, but it's more difficult for the for the commission to generate a SMART goal to help council and staff make these things happen. One of them is restarting and re-getting and revitalizing a functional local MRF. The MRF has been closed really for I think 3.5 years now. Is it? Almost.
2.5, yep.
2.5, yeah. And so I think it's very important to get a functional local MRF so that we're not trucking our recyclables all the way to Cincinnati every month, which is costing the city, I think, an extra $20,000 a month. That might be better invested in a local facility. Yeah. So, and then the 4th item would be Sunday organics and recycling collections downtown. Over the last 5 years, there's been an increasing, there's been the balance of businesses in the downtown area has shifted more towards restaurants. So they've generated more, especially organic material, and the activity downtown, which we all treasure, has created more recyclables. So, and a lot of that activity is on the weekends. So this stuff piles up. So through conversations in the community, it seems like a Sunday collection, both for recycling and organics, would improve the solid waste program in the downtown area especially. So we'd like to focus on that, but we don't exactly know what our role would be in making that happen. The 5th and last thing is year-round residential composting, where I, for example, have been putting all my kitchen waste into my yard container all winter, and it's no problem. It's in the garage. It's frozen. So, and then it's picked up in the spring. So I don't think it's well known citywide that you can actually put most of your food waste. You can put all of it. You can put the meat and the bones and everything into your composting cart, which is labeled yard waste, but you can add all of your organic material that would be compostable into those containers. And it could be also done year-round. So I think there's a role for the commission to play, especially in communication and outreach to the residents and some of the businesses, to make that happen. But it's not yet clear what exactly we might do.
Any questions for Commissioner Brown?
Just earlier this week, I had a meeting with the State Street area businesses and the Main Street area businesses and the whole downtown restaurant business organizations, and they have a slide presentation. They've been shopping it around to council members because they, as you said, want 7-day-a-week pickup of trash and recycling, and they are exploring a special assessment district where they would pay extra and pay for it themselves. And so I'd be happy to share with you that slideshow and the specific contact people that requested to meet with me.
Okay, all right, thank you. Shannon?
On that same topic, one of my roles on Planning Commission is also be a partner with the DDA Partners Committee. The DDA has done a tremendous amount of work on this already, like a whole lot. And they're like brokering things between people, and they really understand a lot of the issues that are going on. And I highly suggest you get in touch with them so that you're not reinventing the wheel in terms of how to assess a lot of this, because they've done a lot of great thinking on it. So I would get in touch with them because I think they're going to get you going, and then to figure out what role the Environmental Commission could play in order to be able to move that forward, because they've just taken on a big chunk of this, and it may make sense also for Environmental Commission to be able to be a partner in that in a more active way.
Yeah.
So I
No,
would suggest
yeah,
you
no.
reach out to them, because I think they're really going to get you up to speed fast on a lot of work that they've already done over the last couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. We've had conversations with the DDA and some of the business street associations in this respect over the last year, and they do have a plan that's fairly far along, and I believe Ed Shaffron is the main spokesman for the DDA in this regard. So we're going to continue to speak with them, and we'll just see what kind of roles may emerge for the commission to help
That's great.
facilitate a solution there.
Any other questions? Commissioner Graham, would you take us through the natural features group's thoughts?
Yes, thank you. The underlying assumption, I think, that the Natural Features Group has been working under very increasingly since last fall, and the understanding of how much carbon is sequestered in a hardwood tree as it ages, is that if we, the city, can do a better job at engaging with our citizens in every corner and in every endeavor, private and public property, to do a better job at stewarding their property, planting trees, diminishing the amount of turf grass that's out there, doing a better job at containing runoff on our properties, we will have, over the long run, a significant impact in diminishing the effects of climate change, at least in our own backyards. The big questions about dealing with carbon emissions are really questions that are state and federal at the scale that we really need to have much more action than we're getting. But what we can do here is what's beginning to be suggested from your Natural Features Committee. And there are really two parts to the recommendations. The first part is a team within the city of staff members whose part of whose work would be to go out and begin to engage neighborhoods and individual property owners, big and small, public and private, with a recipe for better stewardship. And that recipe goes from a team member already existing in Jennifer's program and in the county's program on rain gardens to work on collecting more water runoff. I think there probably are team members for energy. I'm not exactly sure who, but one piece of this is to engage people about doing more about conserving energy and perhaps solar panels. And the third is, of course, how the landscape in general is dealt with. We have a cliche here and across the United States, well, the eastern United States, where it's moist enough, of turf grass everywhere. The environmental cost, the carbon emissions cost, the pollutant cost, the negative impact on the climate from maintaining so much turf grass is, even in just a place like Ann Arbor, quite gigantic. And if we could encourage people to convert to oak trees and a shortgrass prairie or anything but turf grass, it would completely change the chemistry of water infiltration. It would bring back pollinators if you're using native plants or even non-native ones that are attractive to pollinators. If you bring back native shrubs that are especially attractive to caterpillars, you really sponsor our bird population. There are just so many things that so many people don't know about that they could do, would be excited to do, if we engage them and teach them and encourage them and facilitate. So those are the recommendations to try to get that horse going at the city. And a key part of it is measuring what we do. I know the county's measuring their rain garden program very well. Jennifer said she's measuring everything that they're doing. We really do need to measure this so that we can maybe sell carbon offsets as a function of the results we get, so that we really can, crow about the kind of stewardship that happens, in fact, what the change might be. If you look at the aerial imagery of Ann Arbor, where the slopes were steep, you have a lot of native forest fragments because it was difficult to farm them. Farm steep slopes didn't work very well. They cut the trees in the 1860s, but they didn't turn the soil. And so a facsimile of the native ecosystems have come back. South of the river, south of about Burns Park, almost all farmland. Great deal more turf grass, many fewer trees, lots of opportunity to plant a lot of trees. We have to measure and know what the results are. And so part of the process here over the next few months is to try to design what those things might be. It'll take the team sitting down and really beginning to do things before we really have good ways of documenting and keeping those measurements, but at least we can begin to talk about them. I'm really excited. It's been a long time since I've been as excited as I am now about natural features in the city and hooking it to results that benefit us in our goal to adapt to a changing climate really makes a difference. Thank you.
Questions for Commissioner Graham?
Well, I just was thinking that as we do go through the budget and are making budget decisions now and final in mid-May, that we should also be thinking of what we would need from this document that we're looking at, what we might want to, like, for example, Jennifer Lawson said she was doing the tree inventory in 2020. Possibly we would suggest the an expanded inventory this year and move some money into this year instead. Things like that is what I'm thinking.
Yes. Again, the inventory that the Stormwater Fund pays for is that of street trees and some park trees. This larger picture is addressing all property in the city, no matter the ownership, and which is a great deal, many more trees and a great deal larger amount of land. And there is a lot of existing imagery that, much more than I last knew a year ago, that can be interpreted reasonably and very cost effectively to help in this process without new imagery. It might be at some point we'd like some new imagery, but I think we can go a long way if the pilot areas of the city that we looked at in this way work at producing maps and educational materials and graphics and things that we can take out and lay out and show people in neighborhoods what their natural features are, what their runoff is, where it's going, encourage stewardship in all the various channels that it can happen, and respond to citizen requests for help and attention. The idea of the graphics in the inventory is, first of all, really know very well what we're talking about in a given part of the city, at least reasonably well, and to get people excited. It's, you know, I can sit up here and talk about trees, but when you look at the pattern of your neighborhood and see it in person, when you have at least some inventory, when we begin to work on a pilot project, we'll send people out in the field so they can really have an understanding of what that neighborhood's doing and how it might be different from others, and try to get people to be genuinely proud of the resource they have. It's a matter of engaging. It's a matter of being really positive with people. It's a matter of encouraging them to not be in denial about climate change, and by encouraging, the active part of that is courage to make changes to turf grass in the front yard, for example. That's radical, but it's not radical if you're thinking about the climate impact of maintaining that.
I would be really interested in adding a quality category to this in terms of the quantification of these areas and woodlands and things like that. Something I see a lot of on Planning Commission is we really protect our woodlands all pretty much the same.
Yep.
Whether it's a buckthorn wasteland or whether it's absolutely glorious, gorgeous old forest fragments. And I think it's really important for us to start to have some, and I don't mean go out to every single site and assess it, but I think there are some tools that we have just with old aerial photographs that we can get from the county that can start to look at smaller areas, then to be able to go out and check those areas. And something that I use all the time to be able to get a general assessment of quality is going back to the photographs in the 1940s that the city has, and you can see all those kind of like old hedgerows and the big trees, you can see them. And you can also see which things were just being actively farmed. And most of those areas that were being actively farmed, the forests are pretty poor quality now. And the areas that weren't actively farmed, that's where your good stuff is. And so if there's some way to kind of filter maybe so that you're not looking at like all everywhere because that's just too much time, but that you could start to filter it down to look at like that 1940s imagery to see where some of those hot spots maybe are, and then maybe deploy people to have some sense of quality assessment, I think would be really helpful so that people can start to get the story you know, in many of our neighborhoods, in my neighborhood, there's old hedgerows of these oaks that are huge. They're huge.
Fence rows.
And, oh, well, they were once, you know, whatever. The
Property lines.
Yeah, the property lines. And they're just these regular intervals that go every 3 or 4 blocks. And when I talk to people about them, they're like, oh, wow, really? I mean, they're fascinated.
Yep.
And so I think that encouragement is there, but those old photographs can really help to start to tell that story too. And so it would be, there are some tools that are available that I think can make this a whole lot easier in terms of what you're doing and setting out to do, which I think is wonderful. Another thing I would just toss out there that might be interesting is to maybe as part of the city's stormwater program, because native areas are so much better at absorbing water than lawns, that perhaps you can get a small credit on turf transition from turf to something else. And even though it's not a water concentration area, water's still flowing over the top of it, and lawns are pretty bad at absorbing it.
Oh,
So maybe
almost
there's a
as bad as
way
paving.
to be able to have that be part of the stormwater credit program that you get instead of doing a rain garden. That
Yeah.
maybe you could, if you convert a turf to something else other than concrete, you know, that you might be able to get some sort of credit on your stormwater bill for that. So those
Nice
are my
idea. Yeah.
2 ideas.
So there is a defined natural feature in the city called native forest fragments, and it was, and that came about because we did go back and look at the earlier air photos and really began to understand that we had this unusual resource in the city where farming didn't happen. And when farming happens, as you know, the soil gets, and that destroyed the seed stock in the soil. Where it didn't happen, there was enough seed stock in the soil to bring back a lot of the species that were here prior to the arrival of Europeans. Not all of them, unfortunately, and a lot of those areas were grazed by cattle, which, again, ruined it, at least to some degree. So we have
Great.
already built a lot of that in, and it really is important here. But so is the city that was farmed. In my view, that's the opportunity to really restore maybe native forests, maybe others, but in any case, many more trees. And so we're thinking of doing 2 pilot areas. One is an area, Lakewood subdivision out by the Gulf Lakes, where there's a really nice native forest fragment intact and whole, and that stretches out through the neighborhood over houses. And then to the southeast of that, along Maple Road, which is farmland, where there aren't so many trees. And those 2 would be sort of, I think, will be the pilot areas to work on both sides of this coin, the really valuable inherent neighborhoods and the parts of the city where we really need to go to work. In 2004, whenever it was the Natural Areas program began, it began because of a lot of push from the Sierra Club to do something about the dawning realization of how extraordinary the impact of invasive shrubs had become in Ann Arbor. When I was a boy, you'd rarely see a honeysuckle and almost never see a buckthorn. By the time I got into business in 1980, the great majority of untended spaces across the city were completely full of these plants, to the extent there were shade they were casting eliminated most ground cover wildflowers, certainly eliminated the regeneration of trees that were above them, and were radically changing the fundamental ecology of the city. Sierra Club and a lot of other people got together and said, well, okay, at least on our parks, we need to deal with this. And in that process, the people of the city of Ann Arbor were converted. Almost everyone at this table, I think, knows what buckthorn and honeysuckle are. That wasn't true 20 years ago. And I'm sure you're eyeballing one in your backyard if you have one of these things. And thinking about what you'll do with it. The downside of those plants is they are a really great screen early in the spring and late in the fall. And if you take those big things out, what do? Look at the neighbors? It's something to work out with people. So the sea changes can happen, and they have happened here on this general area. And I think the sea change can really happen about doing a better job at stewarding our landscapes across the city.
And I'd just say, put a little wish list and price tag on that, and we can move it forward.
Indeed.
Any other questions? Commissioner Hutton, will you take us through the water working group ideas?
I definitely will. We are probably a little bit farther behind the other working groups because we only had the chance to meet one time. So we have some broad outlines for what we're thinking about and intend to refine them and bring them back to the commission at our next meeting. But where we are right now is we are considering that we will propose a mechanism by which that we can recommend the city measure improvement in controlling runoff and then draft a resolution to achieve this. And some of our thoughts include working with city staff and some of the city interns that will be working over the summer so we can capitalize on that work and perhaps propose a percentage reduction of runoff, perhaps propose places where green infrastructure would be particularly effective, and then possibly also work in coordination with the Planning Commission to see if we could make such a recommendation jointly to City Council. We're also hoping to review and propose revisions to the Green Streets policy, which Jen had referenced earlier. The city has changed the way we approach road repair, and now we rate a road in terms of its quality and make improvements in that way rather than completely rebuilding it. And one of the inadvertent things that has happened through this approach is that we have taken out the Green Streets work that required that green infrastructure was built into the road repair. And so we're hoping to look at the policy and see if there's a way we can redraft it so that that unintentional loophole is eliminated. And our third goal is, as staff and time permits, to review and recommend changes to the floodplain ordinance.
Yeah.
Any questions?
definitely on the list. So I'm not understanding what the loophole is in the Green Streets policy.
I don't know exactly what it is yet either. I just know there is one.
So I think what's going on is, and I couldn't attend the meeting. I really wish I could have been there.
You're forgiven.
But my understanding of it is that for road reconstruction, and this is where you really go down and redesign the road, and you're looking at all the utilities and everything like that. That's when the Green Streets policy kicks in.
Yep.
If you're resurfacing, if you're just doing kind of the surface layer stuff, then you don't have to. And so there's a whole lot of road projects that are happening that could be doing some green infrastructure component that aren't because of that. So that's my understanding.
That makes sense.
Is that the big wholesale things they're doing, but it's just not very often that we actually take on those. And we do them, you know, but there's a lot more road resurfacing, and it seems like, well, this is what we can get into.
Right.
In the group.
Well, apparently in the years after the policy was initially adopted, there was a lot more green infrastructure that was included in these projects, and now it just isn't for exactly the reasons that you mentioned.
A lot of that is that we're so far behind on surface issues on roads that the added duty probably is difficult to finance and fund and go as fast as we need to go to catch up on roads.
Well, there must be a way that we can refine that so we meet in
Well,
the
yeah,
middle.
there's
Yeah.
clearly there are some opportunities in some places some of the time.
So stay
At least.
tuned. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
I have a quick comment. I serve on two of these committees, so I'd like to hold myself and working groups to the same standard that I hold others to, and that is, one of the things that we should do is, these really should be a SMART goal with T meaning time-bound. And in looking at all these, and like I said, I was involved in some of the drafting of these, there's only one that has a time-bound target on it. So I really recommend that we define what that is. Is it the end of this year? Is it a year from today? Is it 2025? Or when is it? When do we want to deliver these things? We should be held responsible and accountable. And the only other thing is, at least for the two committees or working groups that I served on, the solid waste and natural features, I really want to say Steve and Chris did a great job, and I really want to thank them for their leadership. I think we can praise each other's occasionally, and they really deserve it.
Yeah, I think everyone has done a great job.
Thank you.
As far as the time question,
And Susan, I'm sure that's true of you too.
I didn't feel left out, but thank you.
I wasn't on it.
as far as the time question, I think the answer to that is calendar year 2019.
Is it?
End of the year.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was kind of how I was viewing this going into the
Okay,
process.
so if
Of
that's
course-
understood, that's
Of course,
fine.
things can carry over, and I'm sure some of them will, but I think that would be the.
So are we bound by these work plans just until December, and then we're going to revisit them, or?
I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, our bylaws require an annual work plan be submitted to the city council.
Okay.
And it probably should have happened before now, but not having a process in place, it took a little bit, so.
Right. Well, we will come back with the T with our goals.
Any other discussion on this? Are we generally comfortable with this approach and moving forward here? Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve the document in front of us as our 2019 work plan with the one slight correction that my intro paragraph does reference committees and subcommittees. Those need to be work groups because we're not following Open Meetings Act strictures for these groups. So with that change, I would entertain a motion to approve this as our work plan.
I move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I have one comment. It's fine. I have to. Consistent with what I said before, the first line says proposes to address the following topics. To me, that's just far too general.
Okay.
So I'd really like us to say that, we want to
Accomplish the
accomplish
following goals?
these goals
Okay.
during calendar year 19, as you said. So that was in the first line, which I didn't catch. And we're not going to, get punished if we don't, but I really do think we should try to
Yep.
hold ourselves accountable to that.
Makes sense.
Great.
All in favor then?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Next up, I think we can consider that our committee reports. So we'll have reports from other commissions. Commissioner Mursky, anything from Energy?
So the commission is working on a resolution in support of transparency from contributions from electric investor-owned utilities called EIOUs in Michigan, which would prohibit them and their parent companies from making dark money contributions to 501c4s since they have essentially near protected monopoly status. And we know that in several cases, consumers, for example, has been reached an agreement with the MPSC that they couldn't make any for the next 18 months because of the way they did make contributions to try to influence elections and things like that. And we know that DTE is doing the same thing. So we're working on a resolution to do that. In addition to the ordinances that we're working on, which I mentioned in past meetings, lighting, EV readiness, home energy score at time of market, we're also now going to be working on a solar access ordinance. So that would define if someone puts up solar and someone puts up a structure or a tree that then shades that solar, what, if any, compensation or adjustment would be made in that kind of situation. And then lastly, and this goes a little bit hand in hand with what Commissioner Graham talked about, we are conducting 3 A2 energy power hours. We've done those in the past. We're promoting primarily energy efficiency and renewable energy measures. Oh, thank you. We're doing those this month and next month, and we're trying to fit those in because the MPSC is going to be making a decision on a DTE rate case submission, which is likely to replace net metering with inflow, outflow rates, which will, if anything close to the DTE recommendations are adopted, would make solar much less financially attractive. So we're trying to get these in under that date, so to speak. But one of the things that we're doing, Christopher, is we added a slide at the beginning of that to talk not just about the smart energy home, but the smart sustainable residence, where we talk about native trees and replacing turf grass and putting in rain gardens and reducing impervious surfaces and things like that. And I think when we get out of this phase right now, where we're talking a lot about the specific time frame that we have, and we do these power hours, maybe we should look more holistically about these not just being energy focused, but sustainability focused, and how all this fits together. Not everybody that would be sitting in the audience can put solar on, but almost everybody can do something with a tree, or vice versa. If they don't have a tree, then they can put solar or whatever. So we need to make the message broad enough that we cover all these sustainability issues.
Thank you.
That's it, yep.
Thanks. Commissioner Gabrandel, what's new in planning?
Well, something that's very exciting is that from the presentation that we had, I don't know, a little over a year ago about the new lighting, potential lighting standards, that is now in draft form as a new lighting ordinance. So that came through here and went through to Planning Commission, and it looks like it's going to happen. It's not all the way there yet. We had a working session on it, and there's changes coming, but it looks like it's all going to happen. So it's working, people.
We met since
great.
Planning Commission met, so we're making good progress.
Yeah, great, yeah. So that's exciting to see that. The other thing is that we are considering some changes to the office district and how you might be able to have a percentage perhaps or something of it that could be towards retail. And in that discussion, one of the things that came up was actually partly through our public input, so thank you, Dave, for that, is really starting to look at changes to our Unified Development Code through a sustainability lens when we're doing ordinance changes. And so I talked to the Planning Commission about the sustainability framework and about the metrics and all that sort of thing. So I feel like there really could start to be some interesting integration that's happening between some of the things we're discussing here and how changes to our code happen. So that's exciting too, that there's kind of potential changes afoot in terms of the connections, I think, between some of these bodies so that we can have good influences on each other and be able to take good public input and really integrate all those things together. So.
Great. Thanks. Do our council members have any news for us?
I did have a few things. As some of you probably noticed, Commissioner Smith and I nominated Dean Jonathan Overpeck to be on the commission, and I believe he's accepted, so probably by the next meeting he'll be confirmed and join us. That's really great, exciting to see that. Council will be having our caucus again on Sunday nights, every Sunday before a council meeting, so this Sunday at 7 o'clock in this room, and it's a great informal opportunity for residents and council members to talk about Monday night's agenda. And there's also usually light refreshments of some kind. And I'm going to reach out to Dr. Kathy Tyson, the veterinarian, who was active in the chimney swifts, because the chimney swifts will be coming back here soon. And I don't think any sustaining Ann Arbor Together grants have been pulled, but I don't know if the Audubon Society hasn't been doing something. And so got to get back on that. And so we're working hard on the budget, and looking at the city org chart and how much FTE and how much revenue and expenses are from all these different departments, and getting updated figures from Dr. Stoltz on her budgets and work plans. So all of that is being dissected in great detail. And one of the things that came up tonight that was interesting, I think it was Shannon who mentioned it in a question with Jennifer, that if we wanted to fix the roads, that first time assessment, if it's a first time, that has to be assessed to the resident, which is possibly an obstacle. And that theme has come up again when we talk about filling sidewalk gaps. That if it's your first time sidewalk, then some big portion, thousands, is usually assessed to the homeowner. And so I met this week with Craig Hoopy and Howard Lazarus and people from the legal department and a couple council members and all, and so we were looking at redoing those ordinances and rules that require that first-time assessments have to go to the individual, because that might help with our climate action goals. If we can show in the data that it's a community benefit, then we can get it done if it's just because the resident themselves can't afford it.
Of course, those assessments go to the property, not the person. So they,
Yes.
if you're assessed and you pay over time and sell your house, the next owner is responsible for the unpaid balance as time goes on. In other words, you don't get the bill, your property gets the bill for those things.
That's true, and that's something that's much easier to amend, the length of time that the homeowner has to spread out those payments,
Yep.
not more than the life of the asset itself.
Yep.
And,
I
but
think
I'm
pretty
still
much already
very
there.
interested in exploring the high priority sidewalk gaps or high priority gaps that you mentioned, to see if we could fund those together rather than on the individual.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith, anything else?
I mean, to follow up on that last point, you know, the sidewalks are completely different than the stormwater infrastructure, because stormwater is a utility, and the sidewalks are, you know, falls under the city's general fund. You know, right now, we fund that through a millage, and, you know, I think the broader philosophical point is, you know, can we broaden that millage to use that to pay for sidewalk gap completion, which right now is not a city policy, you know. But as far as the stormwater goes, you know, that is a utility issue, and we can't modify that with a city policy that way. At least that's the takeaway I got from what Jen told us. I think the only thing that I would want to add this evening is presentations are really great. Like, this is very informative, but I don't know what we're supposed to do with it. And I would encourage us to only have presentations that are tied to things that we are working on, or things that we should be working on, and things that we can be doing. You know, I think we all like to talk, and we all care very deeply about these things, but I think we need to prioritize our time on, we've got a pretty ambitious work plan, and to have working sessions where we actually accomplish something to take to council and to provide the recommendations that we have. So, you know, and that's true of all the boards and commissions that I sit on, is we get a lot of presentations, and it's a lot of really great information, but it's just information, and if it's not actionable, it's taking up a lot of the time we could be working on something.
Yep. Thank you. Good thoughts. Ms. Drennan, do you have a staff report?
I do. So some exciting news. The Sustainability Forum we had last week set a new record for attendance. We had 106 attendees. It was Dean Overpeck and myself giving a Climate 201 talks. Our next Sustainability Forum is Thursday, April 18th, and we're going to be looking specifically at racial and class equity in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County.
And Emily did a great job.
Oh, thank you.
You did.
The link will be online shortly. We submitted an application to learn more about a low-income EV car-sharing project in LA called Blue LA. So there are several cities that are interested in learning more about it, and we took a lead role in that. So we should find out in about a month whether that got funded. We've been working with quite a few student groups from U of M on our green rental housing policy. Right now, we're hoping that they will unify the rental housing inspection database and the assessors database so we can get some really good information about our rental housing that we don't know at this point. Age of properties, size of properties. We're looking to get 20 prototypical rental housing types, and then we're hoping to do a energy assessment on those types of properties so that we have better understanding of what we can ask for in the green rental housing policy. We're doing some planning for our summer public outreach season. We're going to be at Green Fair here on River Day and Earth Day this year, which we are at every year. The Green Fleets, we're working on our first annual report, which will be the fiscal year 2017 and 2018. Hopefully, as we get the first annual report under our belt, it'll go a lot faster and it won't be this huge lag time. But this is the first time we're doing it, so we're gonna, do the best we can. The bolts are here, and they will go into service in early April, we believe. One of them will be a pool car for here at City Hall. So we're looking at doing some education for city staff about how to charge the bolt, how to drive the bolt, how to not be scared of the bolt. If you've never driven an EV, it can be a little intimidating, and just trying to make it palatable to staff to electrify their miles that they drive.
Emily, how will the other two be used?
One is at the water treatment plant, and the other is at, I totally am blanking on where the other one's going. It'll come to me. And then the other thing we're working with is electrifying golf carts. So if Mike were here, he would probably know about this, but we're looking at getting all-electric golf carts for the next time that they're leased. And lastly, we are starting very early stages of starting a smart city action. We had probably 25 people in the basement conference room to really kick it off. IT is taking the lead on it, and it's been something that I've been personally really excited about, but we haven't had the capacity to lead, so I'm thrilled that IT is doing it.
Great. Thanks very much. At this point, I don't know of anything for our next agenda, but hopefully our working groups will start to bring some things forward. And our next meeting will be at 7 p.m. April 25th, back here. Would anyone like to speak at public comment? If you could just state your name.
Yes, thank you. David Deepice. I thought it was wonderful to hear about how the Solid Waste Committee is looking to work with the DDA about solving our dismal collections downtown in recycling and organics. That's terrific. It's wonderful when we can work with our partners. Too often we haven't done that in this city, so I think it's great and encourage you to keep working with them. I know they've done a lot of thinking about this issue, and they're also trying to look at it from helping our desolate and disgusting alleys in downtown, and certainly this getting together and working on this solutions could solve sort of two issues at the same time. I did appreciate the stormwater presentation, and I do wish there was some way this could be more available. As staff member Lawson pointed out, education is a big problem in the city of what's going on. So that was a terrific presentation. How could we bring that to the bigger general public? If, when somebody says, well, what about stormwater? Well, here, let's not bury this in the Legistar system, but have it available somewhere that people could go and look at it. So those are my comments for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe an online webinar, take that presentation and make that a webinar that goes up on the website.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Anyone else for public comment? Anything else? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.